So the first two things that God said, Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth and have dominion. That's power. And then he says, behold, I have given you every herb yielding seed, every tree yielding fruit, which is the seed of a fruit tree. That's humility, where you represent that God gave you those things. It says, what makes you different one from another? What do you have that wasn't given to you from God? And if it was given to you, then why do you glory? Behold, I have given you every tree yielding fruit. Nebuchadnezzar is a very good example of a person that had power, but unfortunately he lacked humility until God taught him humility. Nebuchadnezzar was seen as a tree that reached to heaven. And here's an interesting thing. Unfortunately, later on, Babylon gets really dark. In Revelation 18, it says her sins have reached to heaven. Babylon starts out as Babel, Babylon. No coincidence there. Babies babble, right? Because they babbled, because they spoke incoherently. They weren't able to understand each other. That's why it was called Babel, right? Or that's why babbling is called Babel from Babel. Now, Babylon represents confusion. People get confused about things. And it's a real tricky situation. It's an interesting relationship that God has with Babylon, because he's working with a king. The king at the time when Nebuchadnezzar's there, he has Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. They're his advisors. He honors them. He honors the God of heaven. And then in Revelation 18, it says, come out of her, my people. So he's got people in there, in Babylon. Babylon is a complex character. Okay? So in all three cases, we see stuff reaching to heaven. The Tower of Babel was supposed to reach to heaven. So in their imaginations, it would reach to heaven. God's people are like, man, don't let it reach to heaven. Because it couldn't reach to heaven. I mean, heaven's pretty far away. You can't take all the material on the earth and even reach another planet, let alone reach to heaven. But they would have told everybody it reached to heaven, and everybody would have been superstitious about it. You know how people are. You know how leaders manipulate people to enslave them by superstitions. And of course, the tree that represented Nebuchadnezzar reached to heaven, and the the sins of Babylon in Revelation 18 reached to heaven, right? So it's like man is reaching to heaven with his achievements. Like Ad Astra, Ad Asperera, or something like that, and which means to the stars and beyond, or something like that. And that was Buzz Lightyear kept saying to infinity and beyond. This gives people hope that they can have like infinite possibilities and stuff. And then an interesting thing happens. So Nebuchadnezzar is seen as this tree, but then it ends up getting cut down. And the tree yields fruit. The tree is a habitation of birds. Now in Revelation 18, Babylon is seen as a habitation of unclean and hateful birds, right? A habitation of devils. But with the tree, in the golden age, the glory of Babylon, when they were allowing God's people to be there, not persecuting them. Later on, Babylon is drunk off the blood of the prophets and saints and stuff. Not tolerant of people like Daniel, who are preaching truth, okay? So, but at this time they are. When Nebuchadnezzar's there, they are. Nebuchadnezzar's a good old guy, but when does he have an opportunity to learn humility, right? Everybody's flattering him and praising him and stuff like that. He's building, he's got all this ambition. He's just in his glory, And his heart is lifted up, which is no surprise. I mean, even the kings of Israel, their hearts are lifted up, So anyway, he says, is this not great Babylon that I have built? And it reminds me of Obama. Obama says, you didn't build that. Somebody helped you. Somebody helped you build that. And that's the thing that he forgot. He's that tree, but God gave him the tree. God gave him trees to build Babylon, whatever other material. God gave people life. God gave us our existence. In him we all live and move and have our being. And this was a sermon they taught in Acts chapter 17. He taught that to the pagans. So this is an apparent thing, a thing that's like self-evident, It's a self-evident truth. That somebody's responsible for our existence, and that person is God. And he wants to make sure you don't end up with any false gods in the way that claim that they gave you your existence when they didn't. God is the one that gave your existence, and he also gives you a lifestyle plan that is sustainable. That if you follow, you can qualify for eternal life. This is important. So, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, he gets a free life lesson. He's able to go to the school of Christ. For 7 years, he eats grass like an ox. I don't know if he eats grass for the whole time, but he goes insane, and during some of that time he eats grass. He's with the beasts, and his hair grows like feathers, and his fingernails grow like claws, so he's like a wild animal. He's the heart of a beast for 7 years. And at the end of the 7 years, he's restored. He gets his mind back. He comes to himself again. And his brightness is returned unto him. Okay, so he falls, right? And in Revelation 2 it says Babylon is fallen. But this time, fallen in such a way that they can't be humbled. Because this time, Babylon says, I sit as a queen and am no widow and shall see no sorrow. Well, Nebuchadnezzar saw sorrow. He could be humbled. He could learn a lesson. But Revelation 18's version of Babylon can no longer be humbled. They're just too lifted up. Her sins have reached to heaven. They tried to reach to heaven with the Tower of Babel. The tree reached to heaven, but then it was cut down. Now her sins have reached to heaven, and now Babylon is fallen, because she made all nations drunk off her wine. Her heart is lifted up. She's presumptuous. Her religion is self-exaltation, presumption. Presumption is Satan's counterfeit of faith. And so, yeah. And that's what we have to be careful of. Now, Laodicea also has a problem. Just like Babylon says, I sit as a queen and am no widow and shall see no sorrow. Well, Laodicea says, we're rich, increase with goods, and have need of nothing. One guy said that, Ellen White said that the Adventist Church has become a sister of the daughters of Babylon. What does that mean? I don't know. Does she even say that? I don't know. I never actually saw the quote. A lot of times these quotes turn out to be legitimate. Anyway, but Seventh-day Adventist Church is not Babylon, it's Laodicea. But the problem is the things that it's saying kind of sounds similar to what Babylon is saying. I sit as a queen, am no widow, so see no sorrow. We're rich, increase of goods, and have need of nothing. So we need a lesson in humility because we've gotten lifted up. Whenever people lift up, they transgress. Okay, and so and in both cases, God says because she says, I sit as a queen and am no widow. Now he's talking about her to Laodicea, and he's saying because you say. He's talking to Laodicea. He's talking to his church. But he's not talking to Babylon. He's got nothing more to say to Babylon. Babylon's drunk off the blood of the saints. Ew. She's drunk on power. And she got her power by killing the saints. By starting out with the Heruli, Ostrogoths, and Vandals, and whoever else they killed, to show that they have power. To force their power on everybody. And we're to have nothing to do with that. That is our salvation. That is our message. And you know what? The hard thing for us to grasp is we've also drunk the wine of Babylon. All nations, including the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I know that sounds like blasphemy, and I know what people are going to think. They're going to think I'm attacking the church and stuff. Nope. Well, we just have to face it. We've gotten drunk off the wine of Babylon. That may be why we're echoing kind of what Babylon is saying. And so we have to face it. We have to admit that we're wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. If we're going to have any hope of having peace with God, Jesus says, if you're blind, you have no sin. If you say you see, then your sin remains. So we have to admit it. If we can't admit it, then we're toast. Okay, Jesus spits our name out of his mouth instead of confessing our name to the Father. He's like, ew, puh. That person's name is horrible because they didn't do what they're supposed to do. They didn't humble themselves. They didn't repent. I gave them everything they needed to do that, but they just kept on being lifted up because that was the easiest thing for them to do, just to go with the flow of presumption. Presumption is Satan's counterfeit of faith. Okay, so I'll continue this in a minute in part 2, so that we'll continue exploring this balance between power and humility. Have dominion, I have given you. Okay, God has given us these things. If we remember that, we stay humble. Instead of getting lifted up and act like we gave ourselves these things. That's a deception, right? So, and we see this very clearly illustrated with the power that Nebuchadnezzar had, and then he was humble by spending 7 years as a beast, as a crazy person. Now, a lot of people, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Who knows? It could happen either way, right? Eggs produce chickens, chickens produce eggs, right? So, and a lot of folks, they don't get power like a king and then have to get humbled. A lot of people never get humbled. If God doesn't chastise you, you're a bastard and you're always going to be evil. That's most unfortunate. But a lot of folks are in a situation where they are humble and they have no power. You got to have both. Okay? So if they're in a situation where they're humbled, okay, well, God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Now God can give you grace now that you're humble. So don't think that it's just a total loss that you're all jacked up. Because I know a lot of folks out there are jacked up. I was jacked up. I'm still a little bit jacked up, I suppose. Anyway, so at least you're humble. And now God can give you grace. Okay? And then if you get lifted up, then maybe he can humble you again. I don't know. We're going to talk a lot about this subject because it's really critical. It's an important subject. It'll probably be 2 or 3 more parts, at least. Okay. Until then, thank you for watching and God bless.